Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us for today's webinar. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. I'm lucky enough to be speaking to you today from Taronga country. Let us know in the chat which land you're on today. My name's Nell Thompson and I'm the Secretary of the Australian Institute of Animal Management, and I'll be hosting the webinar for you today. I've been on the AIM committee since 2013 and I'm also the coordinator of the National Getting to Zero program. The Australian Institute of Animal Management, or as we call it AIM, is the national peak body representing local government animal management officers. The AIM committee consists of a wide range of professionals engaged in the various aspects of animal management. And AIM seeks to support those engaged in the business of animal management and the function itself by providing training and information, opportunities for networking and collaboration, and by encouraging the use of best practice policy and practices. AIM understands the significant pressures placed on local government and related sector service providers when working in the companion animal management space. We welcome new members and people can join via our website at www.aim.org.au. So what's happening today? There'll be around 50 minutes of presentation and around 10 minutes of question time once the presentation's concluded. And the recording of this webinar will be accessible via our website to all members to watch at any time. We're going to ask that you mute yourself during the presentation, and if you have questions, you can start putting them in the Q&A section, and we'll get through as many as we can at the end of the session. If you have quick questions that relate to your understanding of the content, put your hand up and we're happy to answer them during the presentation. There's a little button down the bottom of your screen where you can put your hand up. And if you have more questions or we don't get to yours during the question time, you can send a message to our Facebook page and we'll get to it that way. So I'm actually very grateful to welcome back Dr. Jessica Moore-Jones as our presenter today. Jessica's been so incredibly generous with her time to and for AIM and its members. And we've received a lot of interest in the human side of the job type issues, and Jess has made herself available to share her knowledge and skills for our benefit. These sessions are just touching the tip of the iceberg, and we encourage you to reach out to Jessica and have her work with your team directly to get the most benefit and make real change for your personnel and the communities that you serve. Jess is a veterinarian, a business owner, a leader, a consultant, and a coach in what she calls the people part of the animal industry. Having managed major animal organisations, including as Senior Advisor to Auckland Council Animal Management, Executive Manager RSPCA WA, CEO RSPCA Darwin, and Manager of Wildlife Health at Taronga Zoo, Jess now manages Unleashed and runs Unleashed Coaching and Consulting. Here she works with vet clinics, local governments and animal shelters to develop and empower their teams, their leaders and their community outcomes. So let's get started. Over to you, Jess.
Thanks so much, Nell. Hi, everyone. Nice to see some familiar names and some familiar faces. I hope that's a good thing, that it means you're coming back for more. It's really great to be involved in, AIM taking some of this stuff so seriously and really putting such a big focus on what has previously been assumed to just be something that we kind of either sweep under the carpet or that, oh, well, it's just a part of the industry, there's nothing we can do about it. But actually starting to talk about it openly, starting to get the awareness, help us articulate what's actually going on and be really honest and pragmatic about the fact that this isn't the only way forward, that, our people just have to suck up how hard our job can be, because reality is there is a lot that we could be doing in this space. So that is what I'm here for today. We're going to do, the title of the session is about resilience versus compassion fatigue versus empathy versus moral distress, all of those different words. So I am going to spend today an unusual amount of time for me on the academics of it. Normally, I'm the sort of person who gets really, okay, here's the academics, yeah, whatever, let's get great to the practical stuff. But one of the things that I am seeing a lot out there when I'm talking to team members and to leaders is that there seems to be a lot of confusion about what is actually going on for people. Are we really dealing with compassion fatigue? Because that's the word that everybody knows, and that's the word that gets bandied about. But a lot of the time, it's not the right word. And it's certainly, when I'm talking to team members, it's not what they're experiencing, but it's the only word they kind of have. They've kind of put it in compassion fatigue or burnout, and it's the only words that they feel that they have. Therefore, they're not getting the right support or the right help because they don't know how to articulate what they need. So I am going to spend a little bit of a session today actually just going through what is the difference between all of those words? What do they mean? Not because I think it's really important that you have this, clear cut, you can fully define and a dictionary version definition of what's all these different mental health issues could be. But because if we get better at articulating what's going on for people, we get better at finding solutions and getting people the help that they need, or us, particularly for those of you who I know that there are a few leaders listening today, we get better at putting the right strategies in place for the right issue, because there can be more than one thing going on at the same time. So I am going to spend some time doing definitions and the academics. Sorry. I know that people who come to hear me talk like to avoid that stuff. But then we're going to get into the practical stuff. All right. What actually does it look like to start taking steps to protect your team from some of this? You as an individual, but you as a leader as well. What can we actually be doing to, make sure that we have a team who is set up for success, and that we don't have to just assume that all of those things, compassion fatigue, moral distress, and burnout, are a part of the course of our industry. Okay. And so we're going to do that. There's two sort of different sections. One of them is, what does a resilient team actually look like? What are you aiming for? What are the 4 pillars of a team that's functioning at a high level? And then what are the 4 pillars of how do you achieve it? And what does that look like? What are the systems, tools, strategies that you're going to put in place? I'm kind of merging the two because we're very, very short on time, and a 50-minute session does not allow for any level of detail. But I really want you to be able to take away some practical things that you could implement tomorrow, and maybe bigger projects that you could talk to people about immediately. So feel free to take pictures or screenshots of the screen, whatever, go for your life. If you walk away with 2 or 3 great ideas that you can start tomorrow, I'll be really happy. But if you do need help, as Nell said, because there's a lot in here, just give us a shout. So most of you have heard the spiel from me by now. Who am I? I am from the industry, and I think that's the most important takeaway, is that I am a vet by trade, but I spent most of my career working in animal management or animal welfare in pretty senior roles. And what I realized in that time was that so many people are there because they want to help animals. And unfortunately, that skews us a little bit towards 2 things. A, that our leadership is also there to help animals, and the people part of it is not their primary skill set, and it's not where they put their time and energy on developing themselves. But B, it does mean that we have a tendency to care so much and be a little bit predisposed towards the risk factors associated with some of these things. So we're going to touch on that a little bit. But realistically, within our industry, we are starting to take this stuff more seriously. But what I find is we get, this kind of generic self-help advice, or the stuff that, Google can tell you, or, you get somebody come in who's a corporate psychologist trying to do some work on compassion fatigue, and they're not realistic about the pressures that we face. And so that is where I come in, and that is how I ended up doing what I'm doing, is just really trying to bring the real world of what it's like, not only to be on the ground in these roles, but also trying to balance being a leader in these roles where you do care about your people, but also you do have the financial realities that you want to work with. So when your people come to you saying, oh, pay us more, or we need more staff, it's not as simple as that. You can't just be like, yeah, I know that's the right thing to do to take some pressure off, but it's not realistic. So that is why I'm here. I am also dog mum to this guy who you guys will be super, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit, I lost on the weekend. He went on a big 4-hour adventure. That was really embarrassing given what I do. And I'm also mum to this little not angel here, and have held lots of really, really cool roles. So that's about all you need to know of me. So here it is. Here is the big page. Here is the academic, too many words in one place for you. All right. But I'm going to go through it fairly sort of in detail and slowly. But what I hope is that if you just screenshot this page, is enough reminders for you at a later time to be able to kind of go, oh, yeah, no, right, I get it. I remember. Right. So this is the word most of us talk about, right? This is the one that gets bandied around a lot in our industry, is compassion fatigue. And the generic definition chucked out there for mainstream is that, you care so much that you run out of caring. You kind of get to a point where you've run out of compassion, which we'll talk about in a second about whether that's the right word, that you just stop caring anymore. And the classic kind of vision you might have of someone with compassion fatigue is somebody who can now euthanize a lot of animals in a day without it necessarily looking like it's taking their toll, because they've sort of switched off to it a little bit. This one I'm going to go through in more detail on the next page, because I don't think we can cover the truth about compassion fatigue in one session, in one slide. So I wanted to put it here because I know that it's the one that most people have heard of, but I want to go into more detail a little bit in a second. The same is also true for moral trauma. Those of you who have been to a session of mine before, you'll have heard me talk about whether or not maybe moral trauma is something that's happening slightly more often than potentially overused compassion fatigue. Moral trauma refers to when we are forced to act in a way that doesn't align with our morals. Okay, so effectively, when we either have to make a decision that we don't feel great about, or we are powerless to stop a decision that we don't feel is the right thing to do. So it's kind of doing or witnessing or being unable to stop something that is unethical in our view of unethical or immoral. Okay. All of the research on moral trauma largely comes out of the American medical system, because in the American system, where there's no such thing as Medicare, they have a lot of the same issues on a day-to-day basis that we do, is that, doctors and nurses having to turn away patients who are bleeding out because they can't prove their insurance, or where people are being forced to choose between, keeping a roof over their head or doing this surgery for their child, and all of those sorts of scenarios that the medical profession here in Australia doesn't face. But the beauty of the American medical profession is that they have money to study all of this stuff. And what they find is that people who are forced to behave or witness things that don't align with their morals on a regular basis are developing neurological impacts that on a brain scan look about the same as soldiers coming back from war with PTSD. So it's a big deal. And being forced to constantly undermine your own values and morals has a significant, genuine impact on people's mental health. So this one is one that we're starting to talk about. It's starting to become well known in our industry, but still probably underused as we err towards the words we know. All right, so moral trauma is something we need to get on top of, because the reality is what we do is full with moral and ethical conundrums where there is no black and white. There are no rights or wrongs. It is all shades of grey, and it is all trying to do the best that we can with what we've got. So setting our teams up for tools and mindsets that help them recognize that, things that might feel that they don't align with your values, we've got choices, we've got decisions that we can make, and that make the impact of those decisions less scary. But equally, and we'll touch on this to a fairly decent degree, are the right people joining our teams? And are we doing enough work to make sure that people's morals and values do align before they get to us, before we put them under this pressure? So there's a lot of work to be done in that space. Next one that I want to define for you is burnout. Okay. Burnout is kind of exactly probably what you think it is. It is becoming fatigued and overly exhausted with the work that we do. It is related to work. You don't tend to refer to burnout in your personal life, though, of course, things in your personal life impact how much energy and effort you've got left for your work life. And, a lot of people kind of go, oh, you're struggling for some burnout, you should take some personal leave or whatever. A personal day is not, if you've got actual burnout as opposed to I'm exhausted and fatigued, then, you need a bit more help. Genuine burnout. I know plenty of people in our industry who have taken years to recover from this. So it's really important to know before you get to burnout. The next one that I don't think we talk about enough is professional quality of life. All right. Now, we talk about quality of life in animals all the time. We're super across this, right? But for us, we still tend to think of it as, quality of life as in, are you physically suffering? Now, in animals, we've moved away, right, from the 5 freedoms for animals to the 5 domains. We've recognized that it's not enough to just be free from fear and pain or free from thirst and hunger. We now know that what we should be aiming for is positive emotional experiences and nutritious food and health and well-being, as opposed to just not having those things. So for us as human beings to not apply those same principles seems a tiny bit hypocritical. So professional quality of life is moving away from going, in your work life, are you thriving? Okay, what is your quality of life? What is your quality of your career, your fulfillment, your satisfaction in your day-to-day? All right. And the important thing about this, and the reason that I love this as something to talk about, is because what it does is it takes those negative aspects of our job, which happen all the time, and we can't always control. There is issues with some of the stuff we have to do. There are moral and ethical dilemmas. There is a lot of overwork, fatigue, not enough resources leading to potential burnout. We are exposed to situations that can lead to vicarious trauma and those sorts of things, and they're real. But those things, if we only look at that negative aspect and we forget to take into account the other things that we do in our role, what we call compassion satisfaction, then we're never truly getting a balanced perspective, are we? Because we're always only focusing on the negative. And if we just try to fix the negative, it's a bit like trying to not be hungry or thirsty, okay? Or trying to have freedom from fear and pain. We want to move beyond that. We don't want to just fix the bad stuff. We want to help people move towards compassion satisfaction. These are good things that we do. This is a satisfying, fulfilling decision I made, not just that was a terrible decision. Okay, so professional quality of life, and I think that this is up and coming. This is not talked about enough, but I reckon give it 5 years and it'll be one of our key things that we want to be able to measure and assess, because unlike most of the rest of them, it's actually accessible. Mental ill health. A lot of us feel like we know the definition of this, but I think it's worth just putting it in the mix, because sometimes we use the terms a bit interchangeably and it's not quite correct. Okay, mental ill health is, if you were to translate it into physical ill health, it is a pathology. It is something is not working as it should be, either neural chemistry wise or hormonal regulation wise, or something about the electronic functioning of our brain. So when we think about things that are not, that are pathological in the physical space, it's a lot easier to contextualize. That is where you need a doctor, okay? Or you need first aid. It's not enough to just go, oh, well, rub it hard, all right? Pathology needs more than a rub it hard and, toughen up princess. That is where, in the psychological space, it's important to know that mental ill health, as opposed to shifting from I'm not feeling high well-being or high quality of professional life, those things can be managed internally. Once we actually get to mental ill health, you need actual support. You need that from a professional who is qualified to perform that. And that might be mental health first aiders. That might be, mental health professionals, or seeing your GP to try to work out which of those it is. But I think if we accidentally chuck mental ill health in the same conversation as all of this, then whenever we put in strategies to try to address it, we kind of assume that, oh, well, nobody should have depression or clinical anxiety because we've got on top of our compassion fatigue and moral distress stuff. And it's not. That's not how it works. You know, your neurochemistry not working at top scratch isn't something you can fix with having more lunch breaks, I'm afraid. Okay, and last but not least, I do want to touch on the definition of well-being. And again, I know I'm going over this a lot because it's really important. We're trying to shift away from it being good enough to just not be suffering. We're trying to shift towards, we want people to be thriving. Okay, and so making sure that we take into account people's physical and emotional well-being as opposed to just not physically suffering. That is an important thing to be aware of, okay? And if we put just as much effort into this as we do into the other parts, we're going to do well. One of the best analogies I've ever heard, and some of you will have heard me say this before, is that positive psychology, in other words, some of the same stuff around well-being, is a bit like a garden. Now, I'm not a gardener, so I don't know how true this analogy is, but it sounded good to me as a non-gardener, that if all you ever do is focus on the weeds, right? You've got a garden and it's full of weeds and it's disgusting. And, you know, everybody's like, oh, that's a crummy garden, isn't it? And all you ever do is weed the garden. You do weeds when you're pulling them out every day and you're stamping them out and you're using your weed spray. And, you know, weeds are weeds, so they kind of keep coming back. And so it's a full-time job to keep on top of pulling the weeds. If all you ever do is that, at the end of the year, you probably won't have that many weeds, but you still don't have a nice garden, right? If you want to actually have a flourishing garden, you need to spend just as much energy pulling weeds as you do planting flowers. Okay, because then at the end of the year, if you plant and water your flowers properly, you might still have a few weeds popping through because you haven't had as much time to do the weeding. But that's okay because they are overshadowed and overpowered and outbalanced by a beautiful, thriving, flourishing garden. And that is where well-being, where positive psychology comes into it. It's around, okay, yep, you do need to do some weed pulling. All right. When you've got things that are not working well, we've got to do some focus on them. But if that's all we focus on, is that good enough? Do we want to just be not suffering? Okay, so 2 more slides of academic stuff, then I promise we'll move on to the practical stuff. Okay, so remember I said I wanted to touch a little bit more on compassion fatigue because it's actually a misnomer thrown around all the time in our industry, but unfortunately not correct. Okay, because the definition of compassion versus the definition of empathy, when you dig into it, makes us realize that compassion is a fairly safe emotion. And when we're talking about those feelings that some of us have experienced that we've called compassion fatigue, what we're actually referring to is empathy distress, okay? Because empathy is when you are putting yourself in their position. When I can be in it with you, when I can suffer with you. And in this case, for us, that means either the person, the individual, the pet owner that we're working with, I am in this with you, I am problem solving with you, I am trying to, you know, take it on board and have genuine empathy for your situation. Or it could be the animal. I'm working in the shelter and I am empathetic to the fact that these animals are suffering or they're stressed or we're euthanizing them. And when you are in a space of putting yourself in their shoes, that is where secondary trauma, secondary grief comes in. And so empathy as an emotion is exhausting. And this is a feeling and a pattern of behavior which can become quite dangerous, right? And that is where we can lead to empathy distress and empathy fatigue. Compassion, on the other hand, is the definition of I feel for you. Empathy, I feel with you. Compassion, I feel for you. Okay, so I am an outsider and I feel for your situation, but I don't have a personal stake in that situation. All right. And the thing about compassion is that it seeks to alleviate suffering, is that my role as an outsider feeling for you is to help you fix your problem. Whereas when you are in empathy, it's the same feeling as when you've got the problem yourself, which makes problem solving really challenging because you're in the depths of despair. And so being able to see clear, actionable steps forward is substantially harder. So the reason I go into this slightly, too much detail, and do we really care about the difference between these words? The reason that I want you to care about the difference between these two words is because you can choose whether you feel for someone or feel with somebody. And that means that you get the choice about how sustainable that feeling is, because compassion, feeling for somebody and helping them take action to solve their challenges, that's satisfying. Compassion is a satisfying feeling. Empathy is a draining feeling. And so we get to make some choices about whether we need to put ourselves in their shoes in order to offer assistance. We can comfort an animal without feeling with, we can support an owner without being in the situation with them. And that is a really important mental shift that you can make, because it is safer to be in compassion mode. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some people who take this one step too far, and compassion and the need to solve everyone's problems also can become a bit of an addictive and fatiguing situation. But as it's and its own worked in a non-pathological approach, compassion is healthy. Empathy gets dangerous and fatiguing. So you get to choose. And this is what people don't realize. All right. So I know it seems like a tiny distinction, but there's a reason that it's important to know the tiny distinction, because you can choose whether you put yourself in their shoes or not. And a lot of that is just by choosing to be the person who takes action, not the person who's in it with them. Yeah. Make some sense? The last one I just wanted to give a tiny bit more detail on, that many of you will have heard from me before, so I won't go into too much detail, but that moral injury, moral distress, moral trauma, kind of used interchangeably. They technically have minor differences, but we won't go into that. The thing to know about moral injury is that it's rarely like one big moral injury and therefore we tip off the rail. It actually tends to be more multiple tiny, tiny, tiny little hits to our morals and ethics that then we get the straw that broke the camel's back. And that's where people fall down and really suffer significantly. And because what happens is every time you have a little moral distress, and it's only a small thing, it's fine, I've done that before, whatever, it leaves what they call a residue. Okay. And so our baseline for tolerating more moral distress starts already a little bit higher. We have a moral residue each time. Okay. And when that crescendo of the moral residue, fancy word for once you get to the point where you're all done, it can be a tiny little thing that feels like the thing that tips you over, which is why we see so often something will happen and it'll really set something off. And it surprises everybody, the individual, more than anyone, because, oh, I've done that before. I've euthanized animals before, or I've dealt with an owner who's abusing me before. And suddenly this one is not okay. And you can't work out why. And it's often because of this, right? This underlying residue that's been left. So it's really important, and we'll talk about when we get to strategies in just a second, that we have opportunities, that we have moments, and we have structures built in that help people break down that residue after each moral injury. All right, I promise that's all my academia for you, right? Moving on. What is a resilient team? So this goes for individuals and teams. So I know there's some people on here who are leaders who are interested in trying to create a better environment for their teams. There are also some people on here who are not leaders and are looking for ways to support themselves better. Timing wise, it is Are You OK Day today. And so I would really like to acknowledge that before I jump into here's all of these, really kind of pragmatic, practical, systematic things that we should be doing, to also just say right at the beginning, are you okay? And are you really okay? And who can you have a conversation with today? Because if you are okay, have you got a little bit of room on your plate to make room for somebody who has less room on theirs? Right. One of the things that Are You OK Day, I just posted on my own social medias. We do use the words Are You OK? Because it's supposed to make it easy and accessible for the person asking, which is great. But anybody here who has ever not been okay will know that sometimes it's really hard to just outright say a big frank, no, I'm not okay to that question. All right. So I often recommend starting much smaller for that. starting with questions that people have a chance of being able to answer. Okay. So rather than are you okay, which is a good question, but it requires a big commitment from somebody to just outright go, no, I'm not okay. So what about the smaller things? Like, are you still finding work fulfilling? Are your kids bringing you more joy or frustration this week? Are you getting enough help and support? What have you got that you're really looking forward to? Start with something that can open somebody to go, oh yeah, actually, no, my kids are driving me mad and I'm hating being a parent at the moment. Because that is a conversation that you really can open from there. And you can be more practical and be more supportive, right? The same goes for offering help. All right. I know that all the Are You Okay Day, and they're backed by way more science than I've got to offer you on this particular anecdote. But they suggest things like, offering help or asking the person what help they need. Anybody there that's ever been in the depths of despair, and I know that I am one of them, people that ask me what I need, and I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know how you can help me, and I feel bad for asking if I do. So try instead offering, okay? Just be that person who says, hey, I've got a bunch of leftovers. I'm dropping them at your door. You don't need to answer it. Or, oh, I just joined this awesome book club. They're super friendly and it's really helping me build relationships and have more meaning and hobbies in my life. Could you come along with me? I could do with the moral support. So I'd really encourage you, and I know this is a little bit off topic, but it is Are You Okay Day and it's sort of on topic. So I just want to really put my own 2 cents in there for generic Are You Okay feels at this point for some people like it is just you ticking a box. Ask meaningful questions. Ask questions that help them give a small, well, actually, that thing's not going that well, which might lead you to being able to put the bigger questions on the table. And when you're offering help, don't expect them to know what help they need. Offer, check that it's okay with them, and then just do it. Because that's what people who are really struggling don't have, is that capacity to come up with great ideas. Okay, cool. Moving on from Are You Okay next. What are we trying to achieve when we're talking about resilient teams or you as a resilient individual? We're trying to achieve 4 things in a workplace setting: psychological safety, control and trust, value and alignment, and less stresses. Okay, because it's all good and well to have all of these things, but if you're just constantly bombarded by the hardest stuff in the world, those things have to work harder. So we want to also do a little bit of work to try to make sure, where possible, within the realistic confines of our industry, not all of it has to be as hard as it is. Okay, so given these 4 pillars, right, this is what we're trying to achieve. How are we going to do that? Well, that's with these 4. Okay, these levers that we've got to pull. The levers being our systems, our infrastructure, the things around us, the tools that we use, the place that we work in, the way that we design our workplace, and the things that we use in it. Okay. We're also going to focus on leadership and alignment, right? That means the people who we work for, the place that we work for, the culture, the values, the checking that actually, is this the right place for us? And are you the right people to work here? All right. We need to work on rituals and norms. Do we have inbuilt systemic martyr syndrome where people feel like they can't go home on time because everybody around them isn't, and that would make me lazy? Right? Do we have a norm that says, toughen up, princess, you're an animal management officer, you don't get to cry about this stuff? Or do we have a norm that says, okay, I know you had to put on a brave face in front of the owner, but now let's talk about that. And it's okay to have a cry about it afterwards. Right? And last but not least, the actual policies and protections. What can we actually do to reduce the impact on people? Please excuse me for just 1 second. My dog is whining at my feet to go out the door. He has a whole other door to go out, just FYI. He just chooses not to because I'm on a webinar, and why would he? Sorry about that. So these are the 4 levers, as they call them, which is basically means a group of tools that we have to pull on in order to get these 4 pillars. right? So the way that I've done it, just because in the interest of time, we don't have heaps of time, so I'm just bombarding you with a whole bunch of ideas up front. I've merged those two things together, and I've just put, some of the pillars we're trying to achieve and some of the levers that you can pull all on a slide each, right? So it's a lot of information on a slide, but again, I really want you to walk away from here with practical, real stuff that you can implement really quite quickly, right? So how are we going to create psychological safety? For those of you who don't know, I'm sure most of you do by now, psychological safety is effectively, do people feel safe to do their jobs, to do it well, to question their boss, to try things, to make a mistake, to ask the hard questions, to have difficult conversations? Because if we can get an environment where people feel safe, then that's 3/4 of us there, right? Because when they're not okay, they're going to tell you that they're not okay. So how do we create that? Basically, how we handle mistakes and blame is a really big one here. So if somebody makes an error, what do we do about it? Do people get, gossiped about? Do people get performance managed? Do people get fired for making mistakes? That's a really big one to be aware of, because if people don't feel like they are safe, then they just brush stuff under the table. All right. It might feel like making an example of somebody who made a mistake is a positive thing, but all it means for the future is that people put stuff under the table. Right? So be sure to make sure when people are making mistakes, when particularly if they're learning, in cultures that I run, effectively you get unlimited amount of mistakes. And as long as you continue to work with me on how we're going to make sure that those mistakes don't happen again, you can make 20 and I'm not going to fire you for that. Moral mistakes, that's a different thing. Choosing to lie or cheat or steal, that's a very different thing in terms of psychological safety, because you also need to make sure other people feel psychologically safe. So, and encouraging a growth mindset, which basically is the same thing, that you made a mistake. Okay, how are we going to grow about this? How are you as an individual going to grow out of this? But how are we as an organization going to take learnings to make sure that we're better and that this can't happen again? All right. Next up, rituals and norms. So this is a funny one because, as you know, I work with a few different groups of people. So veterinarians and veterinary clinics, as well as, animal shelters and animal management. And what I find anecdotally is that animal management officers tend to be the most stoic, because there does seem to be a cultural norm that if you work in an animal shelter or even in a veterinary clinic, particularly the nurses, it's okay to be upset. If you're a veterinarian, senior veterinarian particularly, or if you're an animal management officer, there is this tendency to be like, oh, nah, well, that's just the job, isn't it? Okay. So how do we normalize emotions? How do we go, do you know what? Yeah, it is the job, but it's still okay to feel that. And it's still okay to be upset about it and not have any sort of stoicism requirements. All right. If somebody does express emotions, do your leadership team or does someone in the team have the skills to know what to do with that? All right. And that's usually going to be something like a great trained leader and an emotionally intelligent leader, and or some mental health first aid trained people on your team. And what I was talking about before, the de-acting. Okay. Yes, sometimes in our industry, you actually have to hold it together because you've got pet owners, or maybe you've got the public, or maybe you've even got the media, or whatever that looks like. Sometimes you do have to hold yourself together when the situation feels not okay. But what do we do to make sure we create a safe space for them to afterwards to stop that acting, to turn that off and actually be how they are? We used to call it a debrief. I think a debrief, a little bit like the "Are you okay" stuff, makes it sound a little bit formal, makes it sound a little bit like, we're doing this as police officers. Actually, let's just talk about it. How are you? How are you feeling now? How are you feeling then? Right. And then lastly, on the psychological safety, I really want to make sure that we're clear. People aren't psychologically safe in terms of giving their all and dealing with huge mental drain if they don't have the basic needs met. Okay. So if you're not paying them a living wage, it does not help. Okay. If they're not physically safe, if you haven't done the stuff that just makes them feel like they're not going to get killed or seriously injured today, then it doesn't really matter what mistake handling processes you put in place. People don't feel safe, right? And importantly, administrative frustrations. But this is a big one and it's really heavily overlooked. We do stuff that is upsetting and draining all the time in the necessary parts of our career, in our animal and people related stuff. But when I talk to a lot of people in animal management and vet clinics about what is causing you the most energy sap or what is causing you the most upset, it is not those things. It is people that are spending 30% of their day trying to fix or get hold of someone from IT. It is people whose, workplace software requires them to spend more time writing up the incident than dealing with the incident itself. It is people who don't have the tools to do the job properly because it takes 20 minutes for their laptop to turn on. People who spend a lot of their frustration and sap a lot of their emotional resilience dealing with crummy ass IT or administrative burden. They just don't have as much space left to deal with the stuff in our job that isn't avoidable and that is important. I would really encourage you as a tool to improving your people's well-being is improve your IT, improve your administrative support. Okay. And your systems and your functions, the things that when people come to you day to day, or when you send out a survey going, what could you think we could improve? They all be like, fix the darn computers or improve the internet speed or make our, body cams work properly or improve the efficiency of XYZ. Take that seriously. You don't want your people wasting their emotional reserves on stuff that just does not need to happen. All right. I really like this. I highly recommend focusing that area. All right, next up, what did we talk about? Control and trust. We want people to feel control and trust. You as an individual, how can you create more of this for yourself? All right. Firstly, we need to make sure that our organizations and our decision-making is collaborative. Now, that doesn't mean to say that every decision everybody gets a say in, because that is very slow and very frustrating. Collaboration doesn't have to look like everybody gets a seat at every table. It does have to look like we all were involved in deciding beforehand how we will make these decisions. And then when these decisions happen, I feel like I have my input into that conversation. So that might mean that you're, depending on the size of your organization and your structure, that might mean that your animal attendants get an input somewhere in the chain about whether or not we euthanize an animal that's been in care. All right. It doesn't just get to be the vet who sees it for 20 minutes and makes an assessment and has no idea what it's like in the kennels or how cuddly it is. Everybody who touches a process needs to feel that their time and contribution and their knowledge of that part, particularly when it comes to animals or people, that is important and that is taken seriously. If that all that is that the animal attendant who cares for the animal at the end of every day has to write a small summary of, really great day, definitely improving, or, deteriorating in care, concerned about animal welfare, whatever that looks like, make sure that people's expertise about the situation does get a chance to be involved in your conversation, and show them how you are using that information to make a decision. All right. So when you make a decision that might be controversial or is going to upset somebody, say, I have reviewed everybody's comments about this animal. I have taken the behaviorist perspective. I am, connecting that with what the veterinarians told me, really making sure that we have people trust that their opinion got taken into account. All right. If you can, before you have to make hard decisions, people should know what those decisions are probably going to be. That means, something that a lot of great shelters have, and certainly I can help you with creating, is a matrix of which sort of animals do we save, which do we not. We know up front which animals are going to make it through, to reduce the compassion fatigue and that trauma that people experience of having to make those decisions on the day. Actually, if all they're doing is they made that decision as a team many, many months ago, on the day, it feels a lot easier. I'm following the policy. Yes, we all agreed to this, as opposed to I am the bad guy because I am recommending that this animal shouldn't make it through. Okay. So if you can come up with some of that stuff, or as much of that stuff as possible in advance. People want autonomy. As leaders, sometimes it's easy for us to forget that this is not something that our staff have. We get to decide, my brain's not working right now. I might just do an easy couple of tasks on my emails or clear my email list, and I'll chunk into that really hard, emotionally draining business case I need to do later on. Our staff don't get, they just have to do what they need to do at given parts of the day. So where can you give them autonomy around the things that they enjoy, the parts of their day that do have some options? Okay. Is there one staff member who really loves walking dogs and one staff member who really likes working with the cats? Do you have to force them to do the same shifts, or can they swap? That sort of stuff. Right. And transparency all comes back to the same stuff. Do they know how the decisions are going to be made? Are they expecting it before it happens? Because shock on top of distress does not help. So do they understand how you're making decisions, which is where one of those matrices can be really helpful. If you go, okay, well, we score this medical problem as a 3 out of 5 and this behavioral problem as a 2 out of 5. So a 2 and a 3 medically and behaviorally, we would try to work with, but a 6 out of 6, that sort of stuff. Do they know what's coming? And do they trust that you actually are going to make the decision aligned with that? Yeah. Value and alignment. Some of these stuff you can do straight away. Some of them are a little bit harder and do need a little bit more support. But again, just reach out if you need it. How recent is your mission and values reviewed? Do people know what they are? When people get a job with you, do they know under what circumstance you're going to euthanize animals and which you're not? When people apply for a job with you, do you give them an opt-out? As in a 3-month trial where they can go, no blame, no responsibility, just actually no, your values don't align with mine, I'm out. Or are people locked in to, oh God, I think I made a terrible decision, but now I have to live with it. Okay. Make sure that your onboarding process, again, as well as your recruitment process, over and over again, talking. This is why we would make that decision. This is how we will go about that. Giving them opportunities to understand and opt out if they need to, right? Hire fast, fire faster. If people are not aligned with your values, don't keep them around because they will impact everyone else's levels of moral distress. All right. This is pretty important. And, reward and recognition for alignment, not skill. A lot of us have a tendency towards rewarding people who are great at their jobs with promotions. Okay. Actually, make sure that they are aligned with your values. Mastery. There's a really great study that only came out very recently in Australia, in fact, that showed that the ability to job craft made a huge impact on animal shelter workers' resilience. Okay. Basically, that means is, do I get any say over where I go in this organization? Are there incredibly set roles? And if you're an animal attendant or if you're an animal officer, you only do these tasks? Or do I get to go, hey, this is my passion. I want to work with cats more, or I want to work more with the people facing stuff, or I really want to do this project and get more involved with the desexing, where people have the choice to work towards something that's meaningful for them and craft their job in a way that best utilizes their skills and passions. Of course, is still meaningful for the organization. That's really protective. Okay. And lastly, development. All right. We focus so much on improving people's technical skills. Let's focus on their emotional intelligence. Can they articulate some of the stuff we've just talked about? Right? Can they articulate when they're not okay? Can they notice when other people are not okay? Can they give people the benefit of the doubt? Right? This one, anybody who's heard me talk will know that this is important to me, the narrative of our industry. Whether we have it all doom and gloom, whether we are introducing people and exposing people to role models who do love this industry and have had long, fulfilling and engaged and sustainable careers in it? Or are we only exposing them to the louder voices on social media that are telling them how miserable it is and how it's going to eat them alive and how they're going to quit really quickly or they're going to burn out? Are we balancing the narrative that they might be hearing? Okay. Last but not least, actually, what can we do to minimize those stresses so that all of the stuff we're doing, we can do workshops till the cows come home on trying to improve your team's resilience, but how do we just not need them to be quite so resilient in the first place? All right. Remember we talked about the administrative functions? I put that in there twice on purpose because it's really, really important. Your infrastructure really matters, okay? Do they have a quiet space to go and just recoup after a traumatic moment, right? Do they have somewhere to sit and take some deep breaths or just have a quiet conversation with someone asking them how they're feeling? If you've got a big enough, organization that they've got an outdoor space, is that just brick? Or have you got opportunities to create a calm space? Sometimes all that requires is some fake plants in a room, guys. It doesn't have to be much. Some between desk dividers so that people have a calm, quiet area that's not in full view of everybody eating their lunch in the kitchen mayhem, or somewhere to sit in the sun and have a drink of water on actual real grass that hasn't been pooped on by dogs in the last 20 minutes. Those things do make a difference if you have the infrastructure that can allow it, okay? We've talked about this a little bit. Cultural norms. Are you role modeling that it is okay to not be okay, that it is okay to debrief, that it is okay to de-act? Or are you the person who is there for 50 hours extra every week and never takes your lunch break and is always kind of part of the culture of spiraling into, if you leave early, then you mustn't be as committed? If you are a leader, but even if you are not, people are looking to the people around you for, is it okay to take care of myself? And we each have a responsibility to do better at this. I was doing a workshop the other week where I, sort of jokingly asked the question, does anybody here just do a 38-hour week? And somebody put up their hand. And everyone turned and laughed at her like, ha, you slacker. Now, I know it was in jest and, I tried not to be too mean to them. But that poor individual now feels like she is the bad guy because she acknowledges she does a 38-hour week and then goes home. And anybody listening who was indifferent to that conversation or new to the organization suddenly was like, oh God, I better not do a 38-hour week. So what is your norm? How are you as a leader or as a colleague role modeling? What do we expect of people? Do we expect you to lay down your life? Okay, make sure the prevailing pressure is to take care of yourself and that martyr syndrome is not acknowledged. Okay, that we talk about things like, how committed you are to your job is not measured in how many hours you spend here. Yeah. Last but not least, those policies and procedures. Okay, break and finishing time schedules. If you are in a situation where people keep skipping their breaks or aren't leaving on time, how are you going to shuffle your schedule to make sure that people actually are held accountable for doing it? Making sure people take their downtime, all right? They don't have to feel guilty because, oh, we're short-staffed. If I take time for me now, then everybody will be put under more pressure. That shouldn't be their problem to work out, all right? I know that sucks for you as a leader, but working with people to make sure they are taking the time off that they're entitled to. Emergency and foster scenarios. This is a big one. I know a lot of people who are already burnt out in the workplace and then have foster kittens at home with them. And it's just becomes untenable and impossible. Right. I know we're running out of time, so I won't spend too much on it, but have a policy in place. When and who can take animals home with them, because taking work home with you literally is sometimes okay. And it is, sometimes the nice parts of what we do, but sometimes it's the extra pressure we just didn't need. So have a policy up front so that it reduces any moral trauma or conflict when it comes to it. Yeah. So that was a lot of words in a very quick amount of time. And I apologize profusely, but I hope that there's at least 2 or 3 things in there that you can go away and start implementing straight away to try to break down some of that confusion and some of the what's my job versus what's my boss's job, and some of the belief that there's nothing you can do about this. This is just how the industry is, because it's frankly not at all true. Reach out if there's any way I can help. But otherwise, it is Are You Okay Day. So I think it is a perfect day to go out there and start having these conversations. And you can use this webinar as an excuse. Hey, I just went to a webinar. They were talking about this. Can we talk about it? So that is my invite to you.
Thanks so much, Jess. That was all so, I was just sitting here nodding and said, yes, you hit the nail on the head as usual. A couple of things that really stood out for me, the slide that you had on control and trust. I mean, I think that makes a big difference to team members to, I mean, we say that about dogs in kennels and cats, in the facilities. Like, it's the lack of control that really affects them mentally. And that's exactly the same with us, in whatever role we're in. And as you say, those people who are working on the ground have less flexibility in their day to take a minute, take a beat to look after themselves. And knowing what is coming down the pipeline, and having faith in that process, and having been involved, having had all those discussions, as you say, before the big, gnarly discussion has to be had about, say, a particular animal or a case or whatever, that just alleviates so much mental and emotional pressure from people, and so much potential drama from a day.
Mhm.
Yeah, I really feel that one strongly. And the other one I felt really strongly was the administrative frustration. I mean, with AIM, we hear all the time about individuals and teams that are stymied in their initiatives by other departments within council, whether that's IT or comms or whoever that might be. And it's incredibly frustrating. They all know what they want to do, they know why they need to do it, why it needs to be done. But to have all of these other sort of barriers put in the way
Yep.
is, yeah, it's, just sucks motivation, doesn't it?
And it's just such a frustrating reason to
Yes,
be running out of energy and to stop caring about your job. Just of all of the things that could be the reason that, you go home tired, it should not be
it should not.
politics and IT.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. One question I had for you, and I can't see any questions in the Q&A. Do we have any questions from anybody? I see people are starting to drop off. We are at the hour, but if we don't have any questions from anyone, I can't see hands up and I can't see anything in the Q&A. So I will ask a question. I feel like, and this is, I think, very much so with dogs and cats as well, that emotions are contagious. And so if you have that person in the team who is, and we want to encourage feeling emotions and making that okay and all of the rest of it, where is the line where that person who perhaps is a bit more emotional than perhaps the others, or deals in it in a different way, and that can really bring down everyone else? How would you recommend that's managed?
It's a really good question. And I've been in that exact situation fairly recently with a staff member who, lovely and well-meaning, but just couldn't step beyond her upset and,
Yeah.
and her level of distress about situations
Yes.
to support her own team in the same issues. I think there's two elements for it. One of it's that quite sort of mindset, pragmatic, do they know the difference between compassion and empathy?
Mm.
And can they, the rest of the team, can they feel for that person without
Right.
feeling needing to be in it with them? And I think being able to give people that language and those tools around, you can support them and support that individual without having to buy into what she's feeling, just
Right.
giving them those tools. But I think the other part really does come back as well to when is the right space, having those spaces set aside for, this is somewhere you can go and be calm and quiet and recover from an incident. But it's people who don't need that and who aren't right now in that space and wanting to have a big cry or whatever can
Mm.
just get on with their lunch
Yeah.
somewhere else. So I talk about having some of those quiet spaces as a benefit to the individual, but it also means other people don't have to choose to be involved in it right now if they don't need to. So one of the things that I also talk about with teams is around, when someone is constantly feeling a lot
Yeah.
more,
Yeah.
giving other individuals the tools to help step them forward away from feelings and into solutions.
Mm.
And, you let them have their debrief and you have the, are you okay? And I'm here to listen. But once it's coming up again and again,
Yeah.
and that person isn't able to step forward into, well, what am I doing to protect myself? Because
Right.
I'm constantly being bombarded, then giving other people, but particularly the leaders, the tools to be able to ask those questions of that person. Okay, I'm here for you. I want to support you.
Yeah.
How can we support you to not
Right.
feel these things as majorly?
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. That makes total sense. We actually do have a question from Tina. What strategies do you recommend to implement some of the things we've learnt and support staff without creating toxic culture of staying in that negative space? And Tina, if you want to unmute yourself and elaborate on that, feel free.
Yeah, please do elaborate. I'm interested to hear.
I need to let me know if I need to unmute you.
So I think maybe a similar question to yours now, that kind of how do we make it okay to feel emotional and be there and, ask the questions and have the bigger conversations, but not have that sort of toxicity going round and round in a cycle. Is that your question as well, Tina?
Can you hear us now? Sorry, I have Zoe in here with me. Sorry, we have some, I guess we have a lot of issues around euthanasia, and we are a council pound, so we do euthanize things and we try to make decisions together and things, but we use a contractor vet to help us with the euthanasia, and some of their nursing staff, and they have a very different attitude towards it, I guess, and they're very boohoo, and we have a little party every time we euthanize something, and we have lots of food and all the things, and there's crying, and that is all okay. Don't have an issue, but sometimes it just makes it a really negative space to be in every time that happens with every animal. And it's trying to get these people to not have that really negative thought process around what we're doing, because we are confident in our decisions, I guess, on why some of these animals are being put to sleep. We don't generally just put anything to sleep for no reason. Like we're generally putting to sleep things that are behaviourally unsound or medically unsound. We're really confident in our decisions, but every time you go into that negative space, it just makes everyone feel bad, and it's really hard to move people out of it because they have this really terrible thought, I guess, around that situation, and I feel like they're just staying there all the time. It's like, how do you
I see what you're saying, and that kind of letting people have those rituals of, okay, well, we're going to grieve that, and treat that individual that we euthanized as an individual, and we're going to feel that, but how do we not make that kind of a vibe of everything's negative? And I guess maybe, it's a little, have you ever been to, something like an Irish wake, where it's kind of shifting the experience of death from a funeral where we talk about the sadness and, we let people express their emotions, but we do it in a way that it's about celebrating the life and the positive. And, particularly where you're really clear and comfortable that you've made these decisions for the right reasons. And as long as your staff, some of that other stuff around transparency, that they know what those reasons were and agree with those reasons and got to be involved in that, they know that they were good reasons, then maybe it's just about looking at tools to shift the experience of a ritual where we are allowed to express our emotions, but that negative emotion isn't the primary one we've got here. It's about, oh, my favorite time with that animal was XYZ, or, I remember when they came
I
in.
think too, Tina, am I right in saying that these scenarios are occurring in the contracted vet clinics staff space rather than in your staff who work with the animals?
Majority of it, I think, they just have a different thought process around it. I guess for me personally,
so they don't actually know the animals and they haven't worked with them or anything like that, but it's how they deal with the euthanasia concept in their clinic, but they're just contracting out to.
And look, if it is as simple as that, and they're not a team that you have any real influence around their rituals, then you really can just use some infrastructure to protect your team from that. Is there a place or a way or a time at which you can talk to them about this is where and when you can do that. And it's not where your staff have to be all the time.
I
That
feel
they
like
can
we spend a lot of time trying to justify our decisions to them when we probably don't even need to have that conversation with them.
No.
But we try to make them understand, to get them away from this whole, like, we have death parties and things, like, it's just a bit crazy.
I don't wonder whether some of that.
To that question. Did I?
Oh, no, that's about it. And I think too, like, and this isn't currently happening, but I'm aware of it, and it's happened to me in other like workplaces, where if you kind of defend or don't really like get into that whole vibe, it's almost like you're looked at like not being supportive. So it's that really fine line of like, you know, I acknowledge that you feel this way and I'm happy to give support, but I'm not going to get down in the mud and roll around with you and kind of just like make it worse. It's almost like I feel like I'm in danger of getting in trouble, like an attention-seeking type behavior where it's like, it's not actually solution-based. If I don't feel very well, this is sad, I'm feeling these emotions, how do I fix it? It's yeah, kind of that attention-seeking, negative reinforcement type. Yeah.
Find it's very rarely directly attention-seeking. It's more about, you know, some people need to talk it through 16 million times. I'm one of those people, like when I've got an emotion or a trouble or something I don't know how to solve, I talk to my mum about it, and then I talk to my best friend about it, and then I talk to my colleague about it. Then once I've talked about it 8 times, I'm like, oh yeah, I've solved the problem myself now. So some people do need a bit more of that, and that's okay. It does sound a little bit like for you and where you're feeling like you're having to defend yourself, because I know how fatiguing decision fatigue is anyway, let alone having to constantly defend those decisions. I wonder whether having more of that kind of upfront, transparent, this is how we will make the decisions. And then when it happens, just say, would you like to talk about why? Or are you comfortable with, you know, the decision we made based on what you know about our policies and processes, you know? So kind of, you've got the information up front, and sort of just leave it that we don't have to talk about it unless you really need to. And then if they say, yeah, I do want to talk about it, then you go, okay, here's the reason, you know, not from a defensive way, but from a, can you see in our policy why we decided on this animal fits into that category? Then would you like me to offer you any support over and above? You know, that kind of just not allowing the conversation, because they need to, some people need to have the conversation, but about channeling it and structuring it that they knew what they were going to expect. Is there something specific or different about this case that you'd like to talk about, or are we on the same page?
So that's something that I guess could be spoken about with management of the vet clinic that's the service provider. I mean, would you agree with that, Jess? Like, that's something that could be discussed at that level, because then those things can be put in place to talk to the relevant staff, to explain what the situation's, you know.
I think always, you've got emotions, you've got different teams, they're coming at it from different angles, they're going to have their own internal culture, you've got your own internal culture. Just expecting to be able to put those two things in a room together and it not get awkward for some people is pretty unrealistic, I guess. So yeah,
sometimes I don't think they're really conscious of what they're doing, or the things that they say, because, you know, again, most of the decisions we make are pretty sound, and we're not trying to just euthanize everything, because that's not what we do. But, you know, we'll bring a dog in that maybe has ripped someone's face off, and they're like, oh, this is a really nice dog. And you're like, well, you don't actually know anything about the dog. And yes, it might appear nice, but then that just puts pressure back on us, thinking like, did we make the wrong decision, and all the things. So I feel like a bit of it's unconscious, but then I feel like they're just they like to support each other in being negative, and it's sort of hard to navigate that all the time. It's like there's got to be a positive outlook somewhere, and they have that really, I don't know how to explain it, to be honest. They have a really negative thought process around euthanasia, and honestly, sometimes death isn't the worst thing for some of these animals, but how we get them to see it that way, I don't know. It's just, yeah, they have that just really negative thing, and they're always then, as soon as you talk about euthanasia, it's like, oh no, and it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to explain, to be honest.
No, it does feel like, obviously whatever's happening is starting to create pressure on that, that other direction, because you're clearly feeling that you're always having to defend your decisions, which is harder on you. I would probably just challenge the one comment in there around, there has to be some positivity, because that sort of leans in towards toxic positivity stuff. But I think that you can challenge that kind of constant negativity by just asking more questions. Oh, so why do you think? Oh, so what would you do in a different scenario? Oh, okay. So do you understand why we made this decision? Or, have you ever had to make a decision like that? So you can, rather than feeling like you have to defend yourself all the time, you can put it a little bit back on them by just asking them questions. And that's a little bit less sort of confrontational for either of you, but also starts to make clear to them, I have thought about the stuff that you were talking about. I didn't just not think about this. So just asking questions, it's low key for you. It's not very, confrontational for them. But I find that that's a strategy that can just help shift people from that spiral of negativity into, oh yeah, I guess I can't come up with a better idea either. So possibly this is not that bad a decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Awesome.
you for that. And I think JMB, I'm not sure who that had a question, but it looks like it's been covered with the discussions.
Yeah, long-term housing and then legal euthanasia, RSPCA and, those sorts of settings where, you can have an animal in your care for 2 years and know the whole time that it's going to be euthanized or returned to it's awful. It's so awful for everybody.
Yeah.
Obviously, the knowing in advance and the transparency and things not coming as a shock is an advantage. But honestly, I find those to be one of the hardest things. And that very much so is one of those spaces where things like rituals and de-acting and giving an open space to talk about. If I've had an animal in care for more than a few months that we euthanize, I personally, when I've been in leadership roles, have always done a ritual. So in one shelter I worked at, we always lit a candle for them. One shelter we worked at, I was lucky enough that we had a huge space of land out the back, and we actually did little rocks, to commemorate those animals and that they did make a contribution to our lives, and we did get attached. And just I don't want to talk about a mini funeral, because I know obviously in Tina's situation that's something that's been distressing for the team. But acknowledging for those long-term care animals and the caring killing cycle is a really genuine, studied-ish, it's not well understood, but it has been studied to some degree, phenomenon where it's unfair on people to be expected to do it, but it is life. So we have to acknowledge, we have to leave space for that to be talked about and not just brush that under the carpet, because that's where things get toxic positivity on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I think we better finish up. We've gone over time, but no, it's been fantastic discussions and people really want to talk about these things. So we appreciate you staying back, Jess, and talking through things with us. So thank you everybody for attending. Stay tuned to our social media pages and e-news for announcements about future webinars in this series. And feel free to always send us through suggestions for topics or presenters that you'd like to see featured. Thank you so much again, Jess. We really appreciate your generosity and your time and your knowledge. And we will see you all at the next one. Thanks, everybody. Take care.